Welcome to another segment, Pearced Off, with Jonathan M.S. Pearce for the Skepticule Podcast. So, today I'm going to talk about the often controversial topic of profiling. Profiling is often seen as highly controversial by many. It's the act of looking into the common properties of a particular type of person, criminal or terrorist, and using that knowledge to direct resources into particular areas or people in order to get a maximum return on your investment. So, the cost of stop checks, border controls, airport security, and so on. So this means that often people who would more likely appear to be, say, Muslims or who are black, are stopped more often than others when searching out misdemeanors. I generally, with some rather large caveats, agree with some of this and certainly the logic behind it. And it turns out so probably do you, unless you're willing to adhere to double standards. I've never read up on profiling, not even Sam Harris's defense of it, so I'm possibly quite wrong. So please do correct me if I am. So you see, we use profiling all the time. We use it in many areas of society. I'm going to take education, since I work in this field, and show you how it is used. But the general point would be that actually profiling is used when grouping any kind of statistical data and using that. So in both primary and secondary school education in the UK, we have something called free school meals, FSM. So FSM can be given out to your child if you get an income-based benefit, for example, income support or child tax credit. You can sometimes qualify if you get working tax credit as well, but it depends on your income. Your tax credits have been worked out on and where you live in the UK. Essentially, you can qualify on account of, but not always, receiving the following: income support, income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment and support allowance, support under Part 6 of the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999, the guaranteed element of state pension credit, child tax credits, working tax credits, and universal credit, and so on. The point being, the important part is not receiving FSM per se, but what happens with that information and how it's used to profile children to give them extra benefits or provision. FSM children who have been eligible over the last 6 years, which are called Ever 6, get extra funding for their school, certainly at primary level. This funding is for the school to spend as they will, but they will need to show the inspectorate that it is being used to drive up FSM achievement and close a gap between FSM attainment and non-FSM attainment. Funding is also given to schools for children of armed forces families, since they are seen to have extra needs due to parents often moving every 2 years or being absent. So what this is essentially doing is looking at the sorts of pupils and families who are FSM, income support, etc., and generalizing that they, on average, will attain less because of their context. So this has statistical basis with numbers involving attainment. So the proportion of pupils achieving 5 or more A star to C grade GCSEs and equivalents in 2005, so it's a bit outdated. So that was FSM pupils 31.1%, non-FSM pupils 59.3%. And the gap is actually much wider, so 19.8% to 48.1% when talking about English and Maths GCSEs only. So it's really important. The government says it measures FSM attainment because, quote, this indicator is a measure of the attainment gap associated with economic disadvantage. Disadvantage remains strongly associated with poorer performance, on average, at every key stage. It is a leading government priority to narrow the attainment gaps between disadvantaged pupils and their peers, end quote. In 2013, there was an 18.8% gap in Year 6 levels, age 11, between FSM and non-FSM. So in other words, the children are being profiled on account of what their parents earn and are having resources focused on them to make educational attainment improved. The money in education is finite and it has to be focused intelligently so that there is optimized return on investment. As you can see, one of the ways of doing this is to find out which subgroups of children underattain and direct resources towards that. Now, I have some Ever 6 children in my class who get FSM, who are actually high attainers for a variety of reasons: parents getting divorced, income assumed on single mother, and so on and so forth. And these particular few children are not representative of the norm, and this is perhaps why, and I'll go on to talk about this, why data collection is really important, and the knowledge that it's a generalized system. So not only do we profile people and accept that, we profile places, we profile in society places an awful lot. We look at socioeconomic demographics and pour money into social and environmental regeneration in particular areas. And this happened to London Docklands, for example, being the largest case of social regeneration or environmental regeneration, I suppose, in Western Europe. So the point of doing this is to address social needs such as crime, aspirations, social inequality, employment, and so on. In other words, with finite resources, geographical areas are profiled and local or national governments decide which ones are deserving of resources to improve the aforementioned things. There are many examples of this, but I think the point's fairly obvious. So what's important then is the accurate information and data. If the data is poor in the profiling process, then the resources you pile in are essentially being misallocated. For example, if it turns out you're not getting correct socioeconomic information about parents of children who end up being FSM, or you are incorrectly connecting the whole area of low socioeconomic demographics with low attainment, then you get a false picture of what's going on. So you've got to have the data right. The profiling would be wrong. Not the logic of it, but the context of that particular scenario, which is built on faulty data and faulty premises. So these sorts of profiling examples concern things which, when joined together, give an ideal of social cohesion, aspiration, attainment, education, employment, criminality, etc. They have a big ramification, so it's important to get that data right. Put good stuff in, you get good stuff out. Put rubbish in, you get rubbish out, and annoy lots of people in the process. So can we apply what we do and really generally quite accept in the above cases? Can we apply that to crime and terrorism? Well, I'm going to look at terrorism in this segment and perhaps return in the next segment to crime, because racial profiling in crime is more complex and more controversial, but with terrorism it's potentially easier. So if the logic is sound in carrying out those previous examples of profiling, then does it work for adults and adolescents involved in crime and terrorism? I can't see that there's any philosophical difference per se. The only differences appear to come later in the consequences, perhaps, of doing the profiling, or indeed in whether the data in the first place is correct, as I talked about before, or correctly manipulated. And this is more of a problem, as I said, with racial profiling. To exemplify this, I'm going to caricature or overly simplify scenarios, and I will admittedly make up some numbers, but I'm merely showing how it theoretically works. So let's take terrorists. This is what would happen. 1. The government has finite resources to fight terrorism. 2. They need to secure, for example, airport safety. 3. This requires checking passengers for bombs, very simply. 4. Most terrorists in this scenario are Muslims. Data alert, is that claim accurate? 5. Most Muslims have X profile, appearance, properties, etc. Data alert, is that claim accurate? And 6. Authorities should focus searches on people who fit that profile to get higher successful searches per pound. So this, as mentioned, requires claims 4 and 5 to be defended with accurate data. For example, how do conversions from other social or ethnic groups feed into 5? Most Muslims having a particular appearance or certain properties. Can they be profiled to these converts? But let's pragmatically exemplify this. A security authority has £1,000. They need to check passengers for bombs. Each check costs 50 quid. This gives them 20 checks. They have 20,000 people to check. This means only 1 in 1,000 people get checked. They therefore have to make that checking worthwhile. If they did random checks, assuming 1 terrorist in 20,000, they would have a 1 in 20,000 times 20, because they're checking 20 people, chance of finding that person. They would have a 0.001% chance of finding them. Further, if no terrorists had ever been found to be Japanese and on a Japanese flight, would it be money well spent to check a Japanese flight full of Japanese people? One would think not. That would be money wasted probabilistically. If there are 400 people who fit this profile X, say, for example, a Muslim terrorist, and there is a 75% chance that the terrorist fits that profile X, so we've definitely got a terrorist in these 20,000 people. 75% of the time, the terrorist fits this kind of profile, if this is accurate data, and 400 people are of that profile. Then the chance of finding them in checking only profile X is 400 out of 20,000 times 0.75, which gives us a percentage chance of 0.015. So, in other words, there's a 15 times greater chance of catching the terrorist if we use profiling. using these numbers, of course. If these figures are symbolically correct, then this means that profiling is, for human safety and financial reasons, the most sensible approach. Now, if these points hold, then there is nothing wrong with profiling for terrorists in such a way, everything else remaining equal. What there obviously needs to be is a robust and accurate data which tells us what most terrorist threats are and what profiles such terrorists have. So, for example, are most terrorist threats Muslim? Do most Muslim terrorists look or appear or have a profile of this? And therefore, when we are profiling and searching for these in a narrow sense, is that search based on accurate data? The data collection and conclusions need to be accurate. So I've never really looked into profiling and don't necessarily know the stats, so this falls down if there's no statistical case for a profile in the points 4 and 5 above. If they stand, however, profiling stands, unless there are larger, more consequential outcomes to following such an activity, which I can foresee in criminal and racial profiling. I'm trying to think of what these could be with the terrorists would be maybe stigmatizing Muslims, driving them through feeling more like the outgroup into feeling otherized and towards terrorism. However, one would have to quantify that with evidence too. So that's really my point today, is that the logic and philosophy of profiling seems to be fairly sound if we strip away biases that we might have, liberal biases towards it appearing to be harsh on a particular subgroup of people. If we are happy to profile in, say, education, if we're happy to use data to put subgroups of people in and focus resources on those subgroups, that is profiling, right? So why can't we do it in crime? Why can't we do it in terrorism? Now, in the next segment, I'll look at crime because it is more complex. But here, I would be interested to see whether people in general have an issue with profiling as an idea, rather than maybe the minutiae, the detail. And it would be interesting whether anyone has any statistics on terrorist profiling. Anyway, question everything. I could well be wrong, and I'm happy to change my opinions if I'm shown to be so. I've been Jonathan M.S. Pearce, and hopefully I will continue to be Jonathan M.S. Pearce. As ever, question everything, drop by my blog,